This is part 3 of Organized Crime, a walkthrough of various families. There are modifications to this, mostly in terms of edits undone and additional materials added. I hope you enjoy. Men in Black Theory Applied. University of California, Berkeley, Mob War, 1995 to 1998. Starting around 1995 to 96, Agent Catherine, member of an organization other than White Tiger Russian Mafia or Men in Black, meets and attempts to form a relationship with a person in the White Tiger group at the University of California, Berkeley. The attempt to slave trade Agent Catherine sparks one of the largest mob wars ever on U.S. soil, one that spanned the globe. The battle rages intensely in Berkeley, ending around 1998, only when Agent White Tiger successfully purchases Chinese intelligence agents to capture and torture key members of her family. Through this, they break the back of the resistance and call in Agent Michelangelo and the Men in Black to cover up the ensuing disaster. Agent Catherine was the heart of the spoils, becoming Agent Michelangelo's slave wife after a period of training that lasted until 2006. In addition, everyone else that was involved or even knew about the event was put under control. This includes much of the high school classes of Saratoga High School of Berkeley, California, from 1994 to 1997. These individuals were all broken and sold into White Tiger CIA units as slave agents. Several appear later deeply embedded in their units, most famously Vienna Teng. Many others have disappeared and cannot be found. Rumors that members were found in prostitution centers in Montreal and then promptly found dead can't be confirmed at this time. Numerous conflicts, particularly around Chinese asylum cases, resulted in this activity from White Tiger Chinese mafia families with similar Men in Black behavior. The CIA may or may not have been aware of where so many of their native Chinese-speaking field agents originated from. Tax and voter fraud. In the early 2000s, a new pop tax constitutional amendment was on the ballot, fiercely opposed by state businesses. At the same time, a number of electronic voting machines came into use. A number of organized groups began experimenting with voter fraud in the pop tax vote and got caught by local activists. The statistics were based on a series of exit polls that were widely different from the pop tax voting results recorded at the booth. Agent Michelangelo was called in to cover up the scandal, who recruited Agent Hammer to construct the takedown of the scandal in press. Agent Hammer constructed a series of arguments of questionable nature using publicity tactics similar to tobacco executives attacking the validity of the statistics used to prove the voting fraud had taken place. These arguments were later perfected and used to prove that exit polls were not effective in predicting election outcomes, using now almost regularly fixed elections as part of the propaganda campaign as evidence that the technique is unreliable. This is a fairly common cover-up operation, suppressing specific evidence which, though destructive to the lives of those that receive it, is usually not a mob pickup. This process is described in the Men in Black movies as a neuralizer. There is virtually nothing left of my original content in these past two items. Russian mob. History. Desperate to undercut U.S. influence in Russia, a major crime boss of the White Tiger Russian mob marries Boris Yeltsin's daughter, using unlimited assistance from the state to seize back most of the eastern half of the foreign Soviet Union from the White Tiger Russian mob. These extensive ties to the Kremlin exist to this day. Personally, they seized control of ancient torture contracts against my family, punishing transgressions defined by Agent Michelangelo long ago. More recently, they have been expanding with extensive holdings in both China and New Zealand, expanding westward in a proxy fight between East and West in political battles in Georgia and Ukraine, after coming out on top in a fight between Chechen rebels backed by White Tiger Russian mobsters and the Russian government. Russian mob organizational structure. The Russian mob is an extremely hierarchical organization with a level of control from the top down that borders on slavery. The leadership of the organization is in Russia, tightly coupled with the government there. The major groupings of mobster families center on cartels, which are the fundamental unit of Russian mob society. All aspects of society are cartels, including criminal enterprise. Russian mob society itself is a collection of interlocking cartels held together by rigid control from the top down, where the top leaders have complete control over their areas, tightly regulating internal conflict, punishing it terribly. Two distinct relationships exist between mobsters in this group, owner to member and member to member. The relationship between equals in this family are particularly critical, as they are the only limit on the otherwise absolute authority of the mob owner. Absolute conflict avoidance is a critical part, with extensive, highly critical horizontal relationships artificially kept highly cordial. If an owner becomes too abusive, his workers kick up the most likely candidate to replace him, throwing everything they have to replace the individual with a chosen person. That person often dies at the hand of the owner. This can also happen if a person causes too much trouble, getting kicked up, where they must replace their owner or die at the hands of their horizontal associates. Russian mob values. The Russian mob value systems are based on the KGB culture of the enforcement during the Soviet Union, where senior mobsters are the KGB. Of particular importance is the concept of upstanding citizen status. In Soviet society, those viewed as malcontents, troublemakers, or perceived as criminal were not permitted freedoms of the Soviet court system and were directly attacked by the KGB. Those that had protected their good reputation usually were left to a court system of similar or stronger civil liberty protections as most modern democracies. As a result, maintaining one's good reputation is a matter of life and death, especially for the openly criminal. All accusations of criminal wrongdoing are pursued with extreme vendetta for this reason, making denouncing a Russian mobster extremely deadly, even when one has evidence, as evidence can disappear and judges' interpretations bought. This is why calling an individual an upstanding citizen is an approved insult that officially declares the person non-criminal while implying the person believes the person is a Russian mobster that has not yet been exposed. The primary purpose of the mob is wealth aggregation. All status is linked to one's net worth. Unlike the White Tiger Chinese Mafia, defending one's money is much less a problem, so cash in bank is not heavily discounted as in White Tiger Chinese Mafia. There is an additional value. The Russian mob believe that they have the best solution for all evil. Tax all evil at the rate to properly discourage it, but never ban it outright. As a result, there are many highly idiosyncratic rackets in Russia dedicated to selling permission to violate laws. Numerous of these rackets also sell permission to perform criminal acts overseas, providing the appropriate payments are made to the correct authority. The extreme need to avoid being labeled a criminal troublemaker makes conflict avoidance the most desirable character trait in a leader, even at the expense of being passive-aggressive. As a result, all conflict is as manipulative as possible, as direct attack is so deadly, dangerous even if proven defensive against someone's attack. The most common form of attack is cartel blacklisting, as fighting parties attempt to crack the money of their rival until bankruptcy is achieved, ending the person's capability to attack without ever directly launching anything, which often results in the slave trading of the loser to the victor that is typically permanent. Russian mob internal discipline. Discipline is usually the domain of the immediate owner. Two owners can fight but must be extremely careful not to engage in causing problems. The first level of punishment may be light levels of poisoning, depending on the owner, but rapidly escalates into economic punishments involving blacklisting and bad deals with other local cartels. Should the problem still be unsolvable, police may be purchased to prosecute if it is a result of unpaid or insufficient protection money for performing criminal acts, or mental hospital pickups for those that have earned the deepest levels of punishment. Torturers that are native Russian mob exist but are rare, typically presenting a more genteel evil as opposed to the perfect lack of empathy of White Tiger torturers, with a corresponding emphasis on indirect means of inflicting suffering on their targets. However, captured or crossover White Tiger torturers are still commonplace. The system in Russia may be different from its outlining holdings, as I have never visited. Russian mob, money, and relationships. Explicit books for money laundering are much rarer in the Russian mob, especially at the higher levels. Instead, a philosophy of mutual good deals is the norms, where the other members of a group enjoy especially discounted prices and are expected to provide these discounts in return in a relatively equal manner. They have access to White Tiger Chinese money laundering, but more typically use direct transfer to Russian banks with a history of providing money protection services for a fee, followed by laundering through the Russian economy. As a consequence, jobs can be an extremely expensive bribe, as there are competing bidders willing to put nearly the entire salary of a job as an upfront payment to launder the money through purchases and living expenses of the person performing the act into clean investments. How much of Russia's economy is largely for the purpose of concealing dirty money is not known, but is expected to be substantial. Russian mob theory applied. Patent trolling extortion. I was recently at a Stripe EFF panel talking on patent reform where I met Kate, the CEO and founder of the startup Ditto. She gave a harrowing tale of patent trolls, companies that produce no goods but utilize, mainly through threats of inducing expenses at trial rather than the success of their patents, extortion-style tactics to get settlements out of vulnerable startups. According to their statements, the number of startups affected is skyrocketing, 5 times in the last year. The most interesting element of the night was her discussion of how she was stayed in business. An individual that owns the company IPNav made an offer. He would handle all patent lawsuits for her at no charge if she gave him $1 million stake in her company. She accepted. He negotiated away the troll that started the fight and is now fighting the less illegitimate cases brought by her competitor in market. The situation raises interest. This is a classic Russian-style protection racket, a style used by both the White Tiger Chinese Mafia and the Russian. An individual offers to prevent some calamity occurring from an individual that could be fought off and destroyed, but the expense is not in the victim's interest. There are many of them, and the protection is quite valuable. Unstated but assumed is the person is buying protection from the other individual's protection purchase from the consequences of patent trolling. This gives the impression that patent trolling has now been adopted by organized crime, aiming to own the startup business as a cartel. In this scenario, IPNev makes numerous money-laundered payments back to the patent trolls for not hitting the target and pocketing the difference himself. This also implies that the problem's escalation is far from over. This is getting worse, not better, and that slamming very hard the patent trolls will have little impact. The consequences will be bought off behind closed doors by IPNev and its like, using profits from those instances not caught. Starbucks and the contract. While in New Zealand, I heard about the contract, the most extensive Russian mob purchase contract ever performed. They sold to the Russians as requested, but got a binding company statement where the company would have internal laws enforcing certain kinds of ethical behavior by the company after its acquisition in a Russian mob fashion, requiring significant penalties, financial or otherwise, for any violations. The entire ethos of Starbucks was included. However, the underlying Russian mob infrastructure was imposed on any aspect of the company that was not included in this extensive contract. Jobs are for sale and imply Russian mob membership. Furthermore, if the money is sufficiently exorbitant, poisoning is not a problem in their stores. This is especially true if the attack is coming from an internal, friendly Russian mob purchaser. However, in every other respect, the company performs without any outward sign of criminal connections, as is typical of a Russian mob organization. Intellectual property rights exchange. Russian mob. There exists a Russian cartel for selling permissions to violate the intellectual property rights of existing holders. These permissions are effectively the criminal rights for any piece of intellectual property. This includes several different categories: extortion permission on any given property, software or otherwise, protection from extortion, damage or exploitation of any intellectual property, a variant of the first, sale of black market intellectual property, and slave contracts on the intellectual output of specific individuals. Extortion permissions come from this group closely working with or being the same as the group regulating the hacker industry, forcing hackers to have an up-to-date payment for the reason they are attacking an individual or company. Each piece of intellectual property has a price to waive protection, which is sold as a monopoly on a criminal exchange system. After this date, all extortion rackets for using this property are considered legal under the Russian mob system, and refusing to capitulate to demands is automatic granting of permission for hacker attacks on the individual or company. The money provided is also a surety as the cartel enforces its monopoly by attacking unsanctioned exploitation of anything paid for a monopoly up to a percentage of the money paid, at which point the monopoly ends, which almost never happens. Protection from exploitation is similar, but without utilizing permission to exploit against the targets. The black market intellectual property system is a system of exchanges for exchanging black market software. Many independent software developers in organized crime, especially white tiger Chinese mafia programmers, make heavy use of this system to sell their custom creations. This is also where stolen intellectual property is sold. There are multiple designations of sale: exclusive sale, sale by owner, sale by theft, and sale by money laundering. Each of them have its own discounts on the full sale of the software, and relatively severe punishments are applied to those that misrepresent the nature of the intellectual property sold. Slave markets are where individuals declare the expected lifetime value of the slave's work to the racket. All intellectual property produced by the individual has criminal rights transferred to the one purchasing, who might not even have spoken to the targeted slave. Up to a percentage of the money paid is spent defending the criminal rights of the slave owner. In my case, this was $300 million, rumored to be the largest slave price ever paid and the largest slave price ever exhausted.